Most men are so fearful of any confrontation today, they just go with the flow. Be a good little boy. We drill it into them in school. We crush the spirit of a boy so he never even becomes a man. And we're so confused why society struggles. Where are all the good men? You broke them when they were kids.
All right. George, nice to meet you. Thanks for coming out to San Diego.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
We got a wild world out there these days.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot going on with our culture and just for Americans and men in general. George is a masculinity expert is the words that I'll use for him. But why don't you share, maybe just real quick, introduce my audience. Who are you?
Yeah. So my name is George Haworth. I am first and foremost, a husband and father. I'm a combat veteran. I served in the Army for 4.5 years on active duty with one deployment to Afghanistan. And I now serve in the National Guard in a part-time status. And I'm the founder of Elite Sentinel Coaching. And I'm also the co-founder and co-host of the Present Fathers podcast. So that's a lot, but I'm doing a lot of things.
Well, I think being a father is super important, and being a good husband is super important. And I think those are things you focus on. I think that they're central maybe to a lot of what's weird in our culture, the different problems that I think we're facing. I think we've come out of balance. Mm-hmm. And when I talk to George, I feel like you understand balance more than most. You're really focusing on like finding the right path between like tough guy soldier and like more humane human,
right?
I guess, right?
The nice guy, the pushover nice guy type of thing. Yeah.
Which I don't think is what anyone really ought to be as a father or a husband or any of that. What got you into this business? Why is it important to you that people understand how to be a man, how to be a husband and a father, and like, what's your take on where we're at culturally?
Yeah, so I think, a lot of the problems we have going on culturally, you can pinpoint back to essentially a lack of good men, right? Good masculinity. And we'll define that throughout this conversation in more depth. But the reason I started doing this is, one, I was the first client, right? I needed all of these things for me. I had made a lot of mistakes in my life because I was either believing masculinity in like a diluted sense of it, like a very one-dimensional sense of it, or I just didn't understand, I didn't know what I didn't know. And, I'd created a lot of damage in my life and my marriage because I was essentially going through life as a scared teenage boy pretending to be a man instead of actually just being a good man. And so, it's very personal for me because these are the things that what I teach is what I needed for myself first. And I know it works, right? It's just now I have lots of clients and it's worked for all of them. So it's not like I'm some one-off case. There are these fundamental truths that we have forgotten as a modern society. We have belittled men. We've kind of told them to be things that they aren't really designed to be, or to not fill the purpose that they're actually fit for. And that causes a lot of downstream effects, both for men and for women, and by extension, their families. So that's really kind of the core mission. And I think that, if you just talk about leadership in general, leaders are forged, they aren't born. All of my skills that I've learned through military experience and everything, those were trained and built into me. It's not like I just had them from the get-go. So, all the men listening to this, maybe you think you're at a level like, well, I can never be that. Well, with time and practice, yes, you can develop these skills. So it'll look a little bit different with every man, of course. We all have different giftings and skill sets and things that we're drawn to, but there are some fundamentals that all men should have balanced in their life to be a good man that can actually make a societal impact.
Yeah, you mentioned that they're not born with it, right? And we need to, that means that we need to learn. And I've found that you're almost like criticized if you look up to someone as a man now, right? It's like, say you're a good example for me. I look up to Elon, right? I think most people who are watching this already know that. But
had no idea.
I'll get attacked and called a simp constantly over it, right? And it's like, how are you to teach these boys how to be men if you can't even point at a real man and say that's a man, right? Like, I feel like maybe that's part of the problem. Do you have any feelings about that?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah. Who is a good man today, right? Like, name one. Look who we glorify, right? As a society, like it's actors and musicians, and I'm not taking away from those professions, but is that the sum of a man as he was in a movie or something? You know what I mean? It's like we have looked at all these one-dimensional facets of what makes good men that can actually raise better families and say no to things that are actually harmful. The examples are very poor today, right? I think the things that get the most attention, the men who get the most attention, aren't very good examples, right? They're very one-dimensional, or they support a lot of very questionable things, or they're in it for themselves, right? And we talked, before we started this recording, that's something, I think the mark of a real man is not necessarily like how much he gets done, right? Like how successful he may be. It's more of like, what's his motivator for being successful? Is it because he actually wants to make a positive impact for others because he knows he has the aptitude and the ability to do so, and so he feels like he owes it to others to be his best? Or is it like, oh, I can get rich and get all the girls and get all the cars, right? What is that motivator? And so, I'm very privileged to know now on a personal level some exceptional men, and work with them in different capacities. And every single one of them does not care about how famous they get, right? And some of them are pretty famous, but that's not the motivation for what they're doing. It's because they know that they have a set of skills and experiences that they can now pay forward to others, and by extension help others live better lives. And so if that's at the motivation of whatever a man is doing, he's inherently going to produce positive outcomes for more than just himself. And so, as you're trying to filter your examples, no man is perfect. Every man has flaws. Like, Elon has plenty of flaws, right? I disagree with Elon on a lot of things, but he's also done a lot of really good things, right? And so there are aspects I can look at him and learn from, be like, oh, I should apply some of that in my life, right? It's not this absolute. People listening to me, you're going to disagree with me on things. We probably disagree on a whole lot of things. That's fine. But we can find that common ground, or we can learn from each other on the things that are impactful to us and take it and move forward. But in terms of like he's a simp, I think there's a mentality with a lot of it's male. It's a male kind of driven, kind of ego measuring contest type of thing there going on, where it's really just projection, right? So I think if a guy is calling someone else a simp because he's looking up to a role model, that speaks to me of someone who's very wounded and has a lot of their own issues. And so it's easier to lash out at someone trying to get healthier or get stronger or better or whatever, be more than they are today. It's easy to tear that guy down. It's easier to do that and tear them down than it is to try and build yourself up to meet their level, right? And so I think a lot of people with a lot of insecurities lash out on the internet because there's no consequence. And it really just stems back to this kind of inferiority complex. And so it's all from a position of pain. It's not from truth, right?
I feel like most of the people that are attacking in general, it's coming from a place of pain, right? Like, if you are comfortable in yourself, you're probably going to be building, not tearing down. If you're confident, you're going to be building your own business or building your own platform, not trying to attack someone else.
Yeah.
So definitely bothered by that. I think something interesting that you mentioned was the intentions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you intend to be famous? And look, I actually don't want to be famous, but I know that in order to reach as many people as I can, like, they have to see me, and therefore I'm famous. I started out trying to be anonymous, and I realized that was going to hold me back to a certain extent. I can't have a conversation like this. You can't see my facial expressions and whatever. Right. I want to change the world. A negative side effect of that is that when I go get coffee, people are going to know who I am, and I won't have any privacy and whatever. and that's just like something that I've been willing to accept. But all of that aside, if what I think is good for everyone isn't actually good for everyone, then it can still be negative, right? And I think that hits square on the target of like what woke is, right? Which in my opinion is like a big cultural problem. It's like these people, maybe not the people that invented it, but definitely a lot of the practitioners, they really truly believe that what they're espousing is quote unquote nice, and therefore good. And it's like part of what they might be doing is poo-pooing on something that might seem mean or whatever, but it's actually more aligned with human nature and or the system that is humans on Earth, you know, and you'll point at it, and first reaction might be that it's bad or whatever, but it's actually what we need, right? And what I would like to do as part of my mission is to help people align on what actually works and what's actually important instead of like what sounds good on paper.
That's right.
Right. What's your take on all of that, and like how do we sort of get back? First of all, maybe how did we get off track, and how do we get back on track?
Okay, so that's kind of where I was going to take that actually to start with, is how did we get off course? You know, and people will mishear this. They think I'm assigning blame. And actually, Zuby and I talked about this. It's like, if you can't diagnose a problem and at least factually find out what went wrong, then you can't fix it moving forward. So we're not here to play victim, and we're not here to assign blame, because it honestly is irrelevant. It's more of like, we have today and tomorrow moving forward. What are we going to do with it, right? I think a lot of this is from men not standing up and saying, no, we're not going to tolerate that. We're not going to allow that to be taught to our kids or in our schools, right? So that's my question when I kind of look back at this is, you know, like my dad's generation, where were all the men to say enough's enough? Or like, no, I'm not going to tolerate that. Or I disagree with you, and I think this is very destructive, right? That's not rude. That's actually kind. And so like, let's use the example of, you know, someone who has a self-destructive habit, whether it's drugs or being overweight or something like that. If you actually love that person and actually care about that person, you're going to tell them, hey, Penny, I will not support you doing this, this, and this because I'm watching you destroy yourself. And I love you enough to tell you this because it's going to hurt, but in the long run, it will help you heal. That takes some courage. It takes some personal strength first. I have to be at a healthy position myself to even call you up to out of your darkness, right? And I'm not judging. I'm not condemning. I want you to do better, but I have to be a little bit firm about it, because especially if it's like an addiction or something, it's not like this wishy-washy thing. So we have been led to believe that if a man dare hold a standard or a boundary, he's toxic, right? And so I think it started with attacking men first, which then by extension, it degraded the family, because now he's not holding boundaries in his family. The wife starts to control everything. The mom runs everything, right? And again, people will mishear this. It's not that women can't be leaders or women can't do anything or that they're less than men. It's no, we're designed for different purposes, right? And so the husband, the man, should generally be a little bit more of the standard bearer, the enforcer, the holder of discipline, because men are that already. We are a little bit firmer, like we're formed from the dirt, right? And women are a nurturer, a magnifier of things, right? So I don't want to go too far into the weeds on this yet, but I think this is where we started to go wrong. Is it attacked the man first, and by extension, it started degrading families. And so then it's only a natural effect that our society at large has been raised by divorced families with all these, you know, kind of dysfunctions. And so then it's very easy for children who grew up in that kind of unstable environment to be bought into these ideas that sound really good and nice, because they do, right? A lot of these woke ideologies and things like that sound really, really good at surface level. Oh, well, we want to care for others. Great, I do too. However, especially with men, the way I need to care with them, honestly, is more of a poke in the chest than it is like, well, just tell me about it, bro. You're so wonderful just the way you are, right? And that's where we're at, is everyone's just encouraged to just keep being who they are because you're perfect just the way you are, and others just need to understand you better. And it's like, no, maybe you're just an asshole. Mm-hmm. And maybe a little bit of a, hey, buddy, let's maybe reevaluate here is actually the loving, kind thing to do. So I think that's at the root of it. You know, and there's probably a million other factors we could talk about. I think there are some kind of influences that's by design to kind of destabilize us and stuff. But at its core, I think the responsibility rests on men to take ownership of that, even if it's not necessarily your fault. It's like, okay, well, we both have kids. Are we just going to be like, well, I didn't get dealt the best hand, so I'm just going to, you know, it's my excuse to just not do better? Or are you going to be like, you know what, that sucked. I'm not going to let it keep going forward. I'm going to be different, right? And that's, we all have that choice. And regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, you have that choice and responsibility for yourself and for your family.
It feels like a marketing problem to me, right? You mentioned, maybe that guy's just an asshole and that's why he needs the poke, but he might also be too nice, right? I think a lot of times in relationships, men allow themselves to be walked over.
Yeah.
They think like happy wife, happy life. They
Yep.
become a people pleaser, but that's not attractive in any way, right? But again, on paper,
It sounds
looks
nice.
good. It sounds nice. So like it feels like masculinity has a marketing problem. We've been demonized, right?
Yep.
Like the idea is that you're mean if you're
Yeah.
masculine. If you tell someone you need to stop drinking, somehow that's mean, right? And I remember you mentioned like men maybe allowed this to happen to some extent. Like where were the strong men saying no? I remember the first time that I had DEI training, right? And I'm sitting in this room. And on paper, it sounds great. Like we should have a more diverse executive team. And when you're hiring, you should pay attention to diversity and all these things. And all else equal, it's good. But as soon as you assign quotas and as soon as you start to get away from merit, I started asking questions like, what are these policies actually going to lead to? And what could happen and did happen all over America is that the better person got passed up because there was a minority that was available for that position. And I'm all for providing the best opportunity to everyone. But we live in a real world. And like, if you hire less than the best, especially when we're talking about like in our military, right? We've seen people criticize our 3-letter agencies for doing DEI hiring as well. When you get into these critical positions, like you really do absolutely need the best. And there is something to be said for diversity, but there's something to be said for like, sometimes diversity isn't the best, right? Like for example, when you're looking for leaders, you don't need diversity in a weak leader. You need strong leaders, right? So there's going to be a commonality in that type of person. What do you think we can do to better market masculinity or like get over some of those humps of like, am I a bad guy if I say that DEI is bad? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So this is really, it comes back to just a fundamental understanding of what is a real man. And so maybe we talk about what I call the 4 pillars of authentic manhood here to kind of level set on that. But, if a man is lacking in any of the 4, he's inherently either going to be a brute or a pushover, right? He's going to fall to one end of these spectrums, right? So you're going to be the bleeding heart liberal nice guy who just does whatever his wife says to Andrew Tate, right? And in reality, those are both just as destructive for different reasons, right? So just at a very quick level, just a level set on these, it's king, warrior, mentor, and friend. And so like a Greek structure, you got the pillars and a roof. If one is missing, it topples, right? Or if they're imbalanced, it's going to be crooked. So they need to be equally present. The king is men are built for leadership. You should lead. Part of that is holding people accountable. Part of that is having vision, looking forward, driving forward, right? And it's not a position. It's kind of an act, right? It's a verb. Leadership is a verb. It's not this title. So you don't necessarily have to be some important guy to lead, at least yourself at a minimum, right? But men have this capacity to kind of fill that role, and we kind of thrive with a little bit of pressure on us, right? And look at when a man has no leadership and he's just, overcome by all of his urges, he kind of becomes not a great human, right? Like he's without purpose, right? So that's like step 1. Step 2 is the warrior pillar. You should be physically capable of violence to defend your family. But nowadays the threats are a lot more intangible than they are physical, right? The likelihood that your family is harmed isn't from someone kicking in the door and robbing you at gunpoint. That could happen. Very, very, very low statistically here in America, right? What about pornography showing up on the computer or some show pushing something to your kids, right? Where are the real threats? So the warrior should be vigilant. That's why I titled my company Elite Sentinel. A sentinel stands over and watches. He defends the innocent while they're sleeping at night, right? That's where men thrive. We use all of our power and strength to defend the innocent, right? And so like we talked about with the woke stuff, where were all the men to say, enough's enough, it stops here, right? We're going to hold the line. So it's not just the physical side. The next one is the mentor pillar. Men love to teach. And this is where, again, critics will attack it and call it mansplaining. Well, but it's funny, but we live in this world now where the meanings of words have all been distorted and perverted, right? And so everything's natural order has been twisted, and so this is why we're so confused. Now men are so afraid of labels from external sources. They're not teaching others. They're not developing others. They're not going out of their way to help someone overcome an obstacle because they're afraid of being labeled something. And this is a key part of being a good man. Like we talked about, what's your motivation, right? Like I'm not trying to be the best I can be just to brag that I'm the best I can be. It's to actually pay it forward and help other men do the same and lead their families and start businesses and all the things, right? And it's very fulfilling for a man. A man who's able to be at a level where he learns first and then is able to train others, it's kind of this positive cycle, right? And so it's the human nature, survival of the species depends on it in a way too. And then the last one is really the most important pillar, and that's the friend pillar, right? The lover. You have all these, the leadership, the warrior, the mentorship, but it's all from a position of love for others, empathy, compassion, understanding, emotional intelligence, stoicism, emotionally regulating. So you're not just this loose cannon or completely shut down and detached, right? Men lead with the emotion, pierce the veil, so to speak, between human connection, and now you're actually leading. You've established trust, and you're getting on their level. So that final pillar is like the catalyst that makes all the other ones more effective. So you need them all present in your life. And so like, let's look at an Andrew Tate. He's basically like king and warrior and none of the other, right? He doesn't care about anyone else. He just wants to serve himself. He wants to get more cars and more women. And then if you go to the other end of the spectrum, it's like the pushover, nice guy, happy wife, happy life. He's got lots of love and lots of mentorship, but he has zero authority, zero, holding discipline and standards, and he's definitely not a warrior, right? Because he's too afraid to even have a conversation with his wife about, I don't think this is good for our family. So, people will attack each of these things in isolation, and this is where this understanding has broken down. Men aren't taught these things anymore because, oh, well, that's bad. If you want to lead anyone, that means you're narcissistic, you're arrogant. No, it's actually, in many cases, I'm built for the stress of being the head of my household better than my wife is. And that's not because she's a flawed human or something. It's because she's actually more apt and more capable to benefit our family and our daughter and everything by being more feminine and letting me be more masculine. And we've tried to pretend that we're all the same and in the middle. And the lack of polarity has made men feel distressed, isolated, depressed, wanting to commit suicide, and women overworked, overtired, frustrated, unattracted to their husbands. And it's because they've had to become more men and they've had to become more female. And now we're all in the middle and we're all unhappy. And we wonder why. We've strayed away from what we were built for, what we're designed to do. Now, that's not to say they can't, kind of have elements of each depending on your role and what's going on in life. But in general, women should be more feminine and men should be more masculine. And when you have both of that in a family, everyone wins more.
Yeah. I think you really hit on something important there. And I think there's you hit on a few things and I hope I can remember them all. But men and women are not the same.
Nope.
Right? Like I have 3 daughters and they're all different from each other.
Yeah.
But they're all girls. And I got used to what it's like raising a girl. And then my sister has a boy and a girl, and I go to their house, and it's just so obvious. Like, you don't have to look at them. You could just listen, and you know which one's the boy and which one's the girl, right? Like, one of them is just a terror running through the house, whatever, throwing things, breaking things. We have this aggressive side to us as men. Denying denying reality seems to be like one of the bigger problems that we have right now. Yeah. We forget that we live in this real world where we're not the same. And I love the ideal that if a woman wants to be a CEO, if she's good at it, well then, hell yeah, she should be allowed to, right? And there's something to be said for even women's fighting sports, for the women that want to get into that and do it. And if people want to watch it, that's all great. But as soon as we pretend that the defaults are not different, that the vast majority of men are not more aggressive and the vast majority of women are not more feminine, then we really do get confused, right? And we end up in a position where we're afraid to be a man. And I wanted to originally ask you, what is an example of a label that a man might be afraid of getting assigned if he does try to mentor or establish himself as masculine? Right?
Yeah.
What are the labels that they're afraid of?
I think the mansplaining one is a pretty common one. Being labeled arrogant or selfish, or oh, you think you're special? You think you're so, who are you to say, right? It's kind of this, it's very disingenuous from the get-go, right? Like to basically boil someone down to, this base desire, when in reality, maybe they put a lot of time and intention to wanting to actually help someone who's struggling with something that they have the expertise in, right? And it's not like I'm going around all day being like, oh, I'm going to train that guy and that guy because I'm better than all of them. That's no. I'm talking about like when there's relationship, right? Like let's say you need help with something that I can have a lot of experience in. You're going to call me up and I'm like, yeah, buddy, let me help you, right? It's for those like willing to receive it. I'm not going around like looking for some, lost little lamb that needs my help. That's not what we're talking about. And that's, people will go to the extremes, right? Well, what about this one exception? Correct. It's the exception to the rule. So let's stay on target to what is most likely going to happen, and then we'll take the exceptions as they come, right? We've now flipped society around to, we're going to only serve the exceptions and basically forget everyone else, and that actually is like 99% of what's going to happen. DEI is one of those examples, right? Oh, well, we need to make sure that this ethnicity and that demographic and this is equally represented. Well, that's already unequal, because if you just look at the demographics of the entire country, it's statistically not what should be reflected, right? It should be identical. That's kind of a whole separate issue.
Even more complicated than that. Like there's not going to be an equal number of female applicants for firefighter positions, right? Like it's just never going to be that way.
Right. Because some jobs are inherently more masculine. And again, it doesn't mean that women can't do them, but should they? Should all women aspire to be that very masculine? No, it's probably a select few women who are just inherently a little bit more masculine already, naturally want to do something like that, and maybe they're really good at it. Great. Go for it. Be the best you can be. In the same way, most women are going to be on this end of it, the feminine end. And their number one desire that they're born with is to bring life into the world and nurture it, right? And so we've attacked women in a lot of ways, like, oh, you're just a stay-at-home mom. That's the most important job in the world. C.S. Lewis has a quote about it. It's like, all work exists to support the most important profession, which is the stay-at-home mother, right? And if you think about it, like, you're a single dad. How much harder is it? How ill-equipped are you to bring these nurturing characteristics to your household with your daughters? Because you're a man, you just don't get it to the same level that a woman will, right? And in the same way, like, we only have a daughter. My wife has to bring out the woman from the girl, right? I can't do that because I'm not. And in the flip side of it, she provides a value that I could never do. No matter how much I study and learn, I'm just not going to get it to the same degree that my wife ever will, because she just has it innately. And so, again, we're kind of tailoring to the exceptions as opposed to the generalization, which some generalizations are good, right? That's the bulk of the society is going to exist in this space. Well, we should maybe solve that first before we're like only dealing with the exceptions.
So given this vacuum where, people are afraid to like mansplain or whatever, and now we find ourselves as men without a lot of, sorry about my cat down there.
My cat, or his cat's chewing up my shoe here.
We find ourselves without a lot of good examples of masculine men, good, and the ones that we do find, the ones that are gathering the biggest audience, you mentioned Andrew Tate, they seem to like be missing the friendship, love tier heavily. You mentioned that he also didn't have the mentor tier, but he's building a huge list of clients who are learning from him. Right. So to some extent, he is mentoring people. I just don't think that it's a good mentoring, right? Why do you think it is that group, right, of, I'll call them quote unquote masculine men, has been so successful, and he's not the only one, at more or less shaping this younger generation into thinking that's what masculine means, and falling out of balance in that way. Why did that emerge?
Yeah, this is a great question. So actions have consequences. Policies have consequences. Andrew Tate is the natural reaction and pendulum swinging back as a result of feminism. Right? And feminism was a result of men abusing their authority as husbands and fathers and being tyrants and not being leaders, right? They were all so I'm going to talk about something I learned from, we talked about John Michael Clark, right? He's one of my mentors. He runs a thing called the Family Captain. And I did that program. It was a huge awakening for me to kind of take me to that next level as a husband specifically. But he describes kind of like, if you think of a 3-legged stool, that's what leadership is, right? And this, I'll get to the point that you're saying, but this is a really important illustration for us to move forward from, is real leadership has all 3 legs: authority, responsibility, and compassion. And this is universal. This is as a husband, as a military commander, as an owner of a business. This, in my opinion, applies across the board. So authority. You're not a leader if you don't have the power to actually say, we're doing this. You're not. You're just not. You have to. The president has to have the authority to lead America. If that is stripped from him, he's not the president. Mm-hmm. It's just how it works, right? So we're level set on that. The next one is responsibility. A real leader takes ownership of the outcomes. This is why guys like Jocko Willink are so influential, is because that extreme ownership mentality is what good leaders do. They don't worry about whose fault it is. They go, how can we be better next time? What can we fix so this doesn't happen again? It's not the blame game and getting emotional. It's how do we ensure we improve, right? It's owning the outcomes. And then the last one is compassion, right? So you have to have the authority and responsibility, but all of it is tempered with compassion and empathy, emotional intelligence. Your people, you love your people a lot and they know it, right? And that's the piece where a guy like Andrew Tate is missing. He has no compassion, right? So let's go way back, 40s and 50s and stuff. Do what I say, woman. Make me a sandwich, woman, right? That's tyranny. If you have no compassion, you're just authority and responsibility, you're a tyrant. You're not a leader. And then if you go the other way, if you take the authority leg out of it and you're just responsible for all the outcomes, so basically you're the scapegoat and you're just really nice to everyone, well, you're the fall guy. You're not the leader. So we've flip-flopped from one end, right? So you have men, several generations ago being tyrants. Then feminism starts to show up because women are like, well, F this is ridiculous. I'm not going to submit myself to that because I'm just getting abused. Rightfully so. Again, that's a failure of real masculinity. Feminism is a response. Men act, women respond. You can get as mad as you want about it, but that's how it goes, right? And this is why I focus on men, because when they start to act differently as men, it changes their whole family. It doesn't work the other way around. It just doesn't. But feminism occurred, and now you have guys like Tate coming out to be back on this end. And so for guys who've been told they're toxic, worthless, shut up and color, women are just as good at you, all that kind of stuff, a guy like Tate looks really appealing, right? So it's kind of the blinding of false light in a sense. And it's this outlet. It's this, it feels good. Because in a lot of ways, 90% of what he says, I probably agree with. He says a lot of really good stuff. There's this 10% that is extremely evil. I think it's evil. And it's very selfish, right? And so that's kind of the different, it goes back to that motivation piece. And this is where most marriages are at. So you're either the tyrant or you're just the pushover nice guy. And both of those are just as toxic to the health of a family, because either way, you're either pushing down your family and abusing them, or in the other inverse, you're forcing your wife to become the man of the house. So I use that example of like the shopping cart test, right? When you go to the grocery store, do you look at your wife and go, hey, honey, do we need a shopping cart? You're making you're abdicating authority of just basic decision making, probably hundreds, if not thousands of times a week.
Have you seen someone do that before? Ask if we need a shopping cart?
Right. Well, just pick any mundane activity. Hey, honey, should I park here? Hey, honey, how much should I do this? Where's the thing? Where's the this? So many men are so conditioned to just ask for permission. Hey, mommy, can I? That's basically the energy you're giving off. And she's just worn out, So if you're the nice guy who's like, well, it's 50-50, I'm just letting her, have half the leadership role. She doesn't want it. She's not attracted to that. She wants the man to take the weight, the burden of command off of her shoulders so she can be feminine. Mm-hmm. Now, you can delegate. Like, there are many things that my wife is infinitely better than me at. A lot of things. So I go, hey, babe, you're really good at this. I trust your judgment. Whatever you want to do, let's do that. But then if it goes wrong, I don't get to turn around and be like, well, you told me, and blame her. No, hey, you know what? let's figure out why that didn't work, and we'll adjust for next time.
Sure.
Right.
You chose to delegate,
right.
and so you're equally.
So those 3 legs are, I know I kind of took I did the Trump weave here. The 3 legs are really important, those leadership legs, because that ensures actual leadership is happening, and it ebbs and flows. These aren't absolutes, right? Every situation's a little different, so you have to use wisdom to apply these tools accurately. But this is why guys like Tate exist, is for so long men were just told to be responsible and compassionate and have zero authority. They've had it stripped from them. You hear terms like servant leader. That I hate that term, because at the end of the day, yes, leadership is a service, but like I've been a company commander in the Army, right? I'm not serving my soldiers well if I'm like the one scrubbing toilets every single day. No, I need to be going and solving the problems that only I can solve with my authority as the commander. Now, I will do hard work and get down on their level when it's all hands on deck type of thing, and lead by example. But if I only do the mundane things that Private Snuffy should be doing, I'm now forcing subordinates to have to take my role and make the decisions because I'm being, nice or whatever. You see what I'm saying? So these things, you have to apply wisdom, but it's not absolutes. But leaders lead. That's how you serve. And sometimes that means you disagree with people. Sometimes it means you hold them accountable, and it requires those 3 legs of leadership. So hopefully that answered that question. I know I rambled.
You're serving your people in the sense that you're serving the mission, and that they all benefit by you leading them towards the mission. As soon as you try to like make them happy, which is I think where people go with the servant leadership thing, is like you're way off base, right? You were serving them, and I was going to push back on you about the cleaning the toilets. I do agree that most of the time you shouldn't be doing that, but like a good example of why Elon is so effective is because when he asks his people to be there 18 hours a day on the factory floor, he's right there with him, right? But that's the most important
but he's solving problems that only Elon can. You see what I'm saying? Like,
that is because he's the only one that could set that example,
right? So
in that case,
take it out of the business military example. Let's go to my family. So my 9-year-old cannot solve balancing our budget, nor should she be expected to. And if I'm doing the things that only my 9-year-old should be doing, instead of serving my role as husband and leader of my household, I am failing my family. Now my wife has to pick up the pieces and everything. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, again, it's the generalization. There's exceptions to every situation, but the term servant leader was coined. Again, the weapons of the modern enemy is the perversion of the meanings of words. Gay used to mean happy. Now what does it mean? It's made men afraid of friendship, right? Oh, it's so gay. Like we even used to say it growing up. Oh, no homo, man. Like
I hear that all the time still.
Right. Interesting. Look how isolated men are. I wonder why. But the servant leader is a term that was coined to make men afraid to have authority. Straight up. That's all it is. And if you look at it, most men are so fearful of any confrontation today, they just go with the flow. Be a good little boy. We drill it into them in school. We crush the spirit of a boy so he never even becomes a man. And we're so confused why society struggles. Where are all the good men? You broke them when they were kids.
And then
you call them simp when they tried to grow up as men, right? So it's not, it shouldn't be surprising. I wish my company didn't have to exist. I really do. I wish that I didn't have to have a men's coaching program. But here we are. I mean, I'm going to try and be part of the solution, and hopefully I put myself out of business. Hopefully enough men wake up and realize this, that I don't have to exist anymore. That would be phenomenal. But we're a long way from there.
Yeah, I don't think we're hitting that anytime soon. I think it took us decades to get here. If you think about from an enemy's perspective, right? Like, we don't need to name one, but if you are an enemy of the United States and you are looking at what amounts to a cowboy culture, right? Like, you don't fuck with the United States. We are leaders, right? We have been throughout our history. We were rebels. Yeah. We were almost like the definition of benevolent masculinity up to a certain point, right? If you want to end that, what would you do? You
Yeah.
neuter the men,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's so clear that if you want to take over America, you get rid of the masculine in
Yep.
America. You make it bad to defend America, right? You make it bad to be a man. And at that point, we become so weak that it's like super easy to conquer us. And I legitimately fear that, like, we weren't far from going so far down that path that it was going to be like almost next to impossible
Yeah.
to recover from. I mean, I think that, well, you look at like Trump and Elon, and maybe it is masculine men taking our country back, but like X, the people on X, we really decided like we had enough, right?
Yeah.
I think that the men are like re-establishing ourselves in the United States as like having the four pillars
Right.
that you're talking about. And I think that, well, hopefully it moves us in the right direction.
Right.
I'm horrified of where we've been. So I'm like really, really grateful that we get to have this conversation and I can help amplify your business and sort of like your message, because I think it's so important and right at the core of what I'm trying to do, which is like, hey, I'm trying to save the world, right?
Right.
If we're going to do that, we have to save America.
Yeah.
We have to save men. So like you and I see eye to eye on a lot of things. We did this a little bit out of order. It's probably better to have people help understand like why this is important to you
Right.
and how did you get here before we talk about like all the details of what your recommendations are, but it's a little late for that. Why don't we, like, how did you find yourself in this position? Why
Yeah.
are you so passionate about this? Tell me about your story.
Right. So like I said, I was really the first client of Elite Sentinel. I had to learn all these things for myself. And so just at a very quick, high level, and we can drill down if you want, but my upbringing in my family was very intense, right? We walked on eggshells. Everything was treated like life and death. You know, if you didn't get straight A's, you know, you were punished and all that kind of stuff. Just a lot of intensity. And then my parents' relationship was very, I think, was a result of this whole happy wife, happy life kind of thing, right? My dad didn't really have the authority to be the leader of the house. And I'm sure that really stressed him out and really frustrated him. So then he would explode. You know, I mean, it's kind of like this cycle that just started, you know, taking us all for this ride. And eventually they divorced the week I turned 16. That was fun. And through that time, you know, I'm the oldest of three. My dad was only allowed to see us like once a week for like 3 hours or something. And I was led to believe that it was all his fault, right? So I was manipulated to believe that my dad was the one who did all this to us. So I was just this pissed off, angry 16-year-old. And, you know, my mom would overshare a lot of details that no kid has any business knowing. And so this brings up a term, and it can go both ways. It could be a mom to a son or a dad to a daughter, whatever. It can go either way. But it's called emotional incest. And clinically, what that means is when a parent uses the child to satisfy themselves emotionally, almost like a romantic relationship would. So you're basically making the child become your caregiver in a way. And it's that you see, it's very similar to like how an alcoholic treats, you know, the kid has to become the caregiver for the parent. But it's all with emotional things, right? It's like the words that are used and, oh, because you're older, I'm going to share this with you. And so my sense of boundaries got very distorted. And then, you know, I came to essentially hate my dad for a long time at a time when you need your dad most to draw out the man in you, right? And so I wasn't a big guy. I was very small physically. And I was very insecure because of all of this. And so I was, you know, looking to prove everywhere I went how tough I was. And I made a lot of enemies and all that kind of stuff. I was just, because my defense mechanism is to get big and fight, right? I'm going to squash the threat before it can hurt me. Not necessarily physically, but, you know, I mean, arguing and all that kind of stuff. I joined the military. You know, 9/11 was obviously a huge influence in my life to be like, I want to serve my country. I didn't really know what I was getting into. I did ROTC, which is like really low speed. I thought I was going to show up and like do Army stuff right away. And it's like, no, man, you like kind of play Army for a while. Did that through college. I commissioned, went active duty. And now is when I started to feel like, oh, I'm starting to be a man now, right? So I'm like 23, feeling like, oh, okay, hit active duty, deployed to Afghanistan really fast. That was a really good experience for me in a lot of ways. And I know that may sound strange to a lot of people, that going to war was a good thing for me. But it really was. I learned from a lot of really exceptional people on that deployment. And so when I came home, it was like the first time in my life that I felt like I've made it. I'm a man now. And, if I'm really honest with why I joined the military, it was for those idealistic reasons. I did want to be a part of something bigger than myself. I wanted to serve my country. But a lot of it was George wanted to feel like a man too. He wanted to prove that he's tough and he could lead men into battle and be hard, right? And I think some of that is naturally good, right? I think a young man should want to have this desire to kind of earn his keep, right, in society and do something great. But for me, it was like over neediness to have that like validation, right? So it was like my motivation was to try and fill this hole within me. And that's not healthy, right? Anything that becomes your savior like that is not healthy. So then my whole identity became George the soldier. Well, we got married. Things were good for a while, but then my wife had a really brutal birth with our daughter. It was really scary. And then, physically, she was just completely depleted afterwards. And she had severe postpartum. And things really got really messy from here moving forward because all of my woundedness, my insecurities, I started treating my wife like, oh, she's doing this to me. So when she needed her husband to be caring for her and covering her and absorbing this tense situation for her, I basically just became another antagonizer to her, right, with all that's going on. And so this rift really started to grow within us. And just to try and wrap this up pretty quickly, we got out of the Army because it was like, I don't think we can make it if I stay on active duty. So I left the military, which sounded like it would have been a good idea because I'll have more time. We won't have to move around. I won't deploy, all this kind of stuff, right? We can start working on us and fix things. And so my daughter was only like 8 months old. We get out, we moved to Texas from Tennessee. And just a few weeks after that, we separated. And I had a lawyer on retainer to divorce her. I mean, we were just fighting all the time. I was really mad, really frustrated. And now the one thing I had that made me feel like a man was gone, the Army, right? And so I'm still estranged with my dad at this point. I barely talk to him. It's a very like superficial conversation. I'm mad at my mom. I just have a lot of undealt things left in my life that, I've kind of just put some dirt over the top of them and, it's fine. It's just in the past. I don't need to worry about it, right? Well, my demons started to claw their way out. And what I didn't say earlier was, I was exposed to pornography really early. I think maybe like 10 years old, 9 years old. And so that had been another, monkey on my back this entire time. And so for me, my outlet was like sexual fulfillment, right? And obviously my wife and I weren't having a lot of passionate lovemaking together. So, this thing became like another obsessive need. It was compulsion for me as opposed to like husband and wife desiring each other healthy, right? And so I got to a point where I was so selfish, so angry, so concerned with just taking care of number one that I started cheating on my wife repeatedly. And, we got to a point where we're like, well, we want to try, we haven't been married very long. We have our daughter. We got to try and make this work for her sake. And so, very long story short, we did reconcile. I confessed to my wife what I had done. And that was started a very long healing process, of course. But that's like at a high level why, right? So I was this broken guy. And when I really get down to why, it's because I didn't understand what I needed to be as a man. And so, I was ill-equipped to handle these difficult situations like a man should, because I was basically just still a 16-year-old kid who was angry inside, and I was emotionally crippled at that level. And so my only answer was to just lash out at everything around me. And then when that didn't work anymore, well, you got to keep towing the line. And so here I am now. I'm an adulterer, right? It just kept going. And finally, in my brokenness, I like really asked for help. And that really started, the journey there. So I've been through a lot of therapy. I've been through a lot of intense things like that to really get myself right. And through that whole journey, basically over 10 years, I learned what we now teach in Elite Sentinel. All these principles and truths that men should understand. Some of it isn't that hard, but we were just never taught. And after you do it one or two times, like, wow, this actually works. It's amazing. And a big reason too, why I struggled so much wasn't just a lack of understanding. It was a lack of brotherhood. I had intentionally isolated myself from anyone who would actually hold me accountable because I knew what I was doing was wrong. I mean, I was raised better. I believed differently. And I started to hate myself. I was living this double life. And I'm sure that a lot of guys are in similar situations today. They may not have made as egregious mistakes as I have, but they're feeling that strife inside them, like they hate themselves or they're disappointed in themselves. And I like to say most men today are salty. They're stressed, angry, lonely, tired, and yearning for more. Well, brother, I was like the saltiest king on the planet, and that really led me to make all these poor decisions. And it wasn't until I started taking ownership of it. Hey, it doesn't matter what happened to me. I'm responsible for who I'm going to be today and how I treat my family moving forward. And, unfortunately, it took me a long time to really get to that point. And so I started this because I know it will help others and do it in 12 weeks as opposed to 10 years mm-hmm. and not make the mistakes I made. So I know that was kind of a lot, and you probably have a ton of follow-up questions, but at a high level, that is why I have such a passion for this, is because I've seen firsthand the damage that a man can cause if he's essentially doesn't learn how to harness real masculinity effectively. And so for me, I became the tyrant, but just as many men, they detach and just become the pushover, right? And so there's variations in ways that we all cope with things, but I was just looking for an outlet. I wasn't actually healing anything. I wasn't growing anywhere, right? I looked successful on the outside, but deep down I was just rotting away, wearing these masks, pretending to be the right thing, but I wasn't.
I think a lot of men are really afraid to ask for help. I think an important maybe point to make at the beginning is like, what does it feel like to be aligned as like a good masculine man? And I think that Cesar Millan, the dog whisperer, actually, funny enough, like explains it really well. It's calm and assertive, right? Like you talked about how your dad let things build up and then he might explode, right? He was being assertive at some point, but he was definitely not calm, right? And I think that if you can be assertive and calm at the same time, that is like roughly what it feels like to be a good man, right? But what did you feel like? You said that you hated yourself. Mm-hmm. What did it feel like during that time internally? How did you find yourself in a position where you were willing to ask for help, and what did asking for help look like?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't really have another option. It was like, I've committed the ultimate betrayal to my wife. Wow, I don't even know where to go from here. Like, how am I ever going to fix this, right? And we had a therapist. We'd gone to therapy a little, before this. And so, I basically just reached back out and was like, I need help big time. And so, it was basically just, I had no other way out. Right. And,
was it like a feeling of panic or sadness or
anger? I mean, I felt a lot of things, frustrated, angry, embarrassed, lots of shame, lots of guilt, of course. Didn't respect myself. I didn't love myself for sure.
How did you accept all of those things? Like, how did you? I think a lot of people feel that and they deny it, right? Like, I think you almost need to embrace in some way that it like instead of calling someone a simp or talking shit or these other ways that you might lash out if you're feeling that way, because I think that's like a lot of how most people react. You have to like accept, like, this is actually me. This is my problem. I'm the one that sucks. Like, can you talk about how did you get there? Because I think so many people never get there. They don't accept the responsibility that, like, I can do something about this. There's a lot of men that have the hardest time, you can call them incels or whatever else. Like, they can't attract a woman,
right?
And they think that there's nothing that they can do about it. My reality is that there's everything that you can do about it, right? Yeah. And I think that's your reality too. But I think so many people never are willing to take that step. Maybe they don't even connect in their head that they need that step. Did you bridge that gap at any point? Like, what does that look like?
I'm trying to think. So prior to getting out of the Army, my wife and I went to this place called Onsite. It's in Tennessee. And it's like intense group therapy. It's experiential therapy is what it's called. And so we went as a couple, which is actually the wrong order of things. You should go individually and then go as a couple. But we were just desperate, right? And we were still on active duty. You know, we'd had a lot of really hard things already happen. And I'm being vague on the details because that's my wife's side of the story to tell. And out of respect to her, it's not really essential to get to the point that we're getting to. So I'm not trying to like hide anything. It's just the result is I did not respond appropriately to anything. So we were just not doing good. We went to this place Onsite, and that was kind of the first like awareness, self-awareness, like rock. It was like a rock being thrown at my walls of like, hey bro, maybe something isn't right, you know? Because what I learned through Onsite, one of the exercises they had us do was you basically drew an entire timeline of your life prior to meeting your spouse. And like you list everything, and then you narrate to your group your life like a podcast, right? So it takes a long time to get through all this for each person. And that was the first time I really realized like, oh shit, like my upbringing was pretty dysfunctional. You know, just because we were like upper middle class, sort of like I had things relatively provided for me, doesn't necessarily mean it was healthy, you know? And again, not to be like victim about it, but it was kind of just like, oh crap, maybe that's why I'm behaving the way I'm behaving, right? It was the first kind of inkling that I realized like maybe I've got some real work to do. So after, you know, fast forward just a little bit, we're only talking like another year from that point, I'm just like at my lowest, like holy crap, I suck, you know, feeling all those things I just described. So I reached back out to our therapist, who was the one who got us into Onsite in the first place. She actually works in Onsite when they do these sessions, but she was like, you need to go back for you and let's work from there, right? And so I did, and told my wife, yeah, I'm going back. And I did, and that was the first time where, so I kind of alluded to this earlier. I talked about like wearing all these masks. I'd been carrying masks around my whole life to look the part everywhere I went, right? And essentially, it's an impossible weight for anyone to carry. It'll catch up with you eventually, right? You can only keep the act up for so long, right? You know, the problem with lies is you forget like who you've told the lies to, right? This is why I just live in the truth today, right? Because maybe it offends you or maybe it hurts you, but I don't have to try and play this game of like, well, who did I tell this, that, and you know, whatever. I am who I am. But that was the first time in my life that I admitted, really, here's how shitty George is, right? All of it, to this group of people that I'm working with, and they're all broken people too. And I was expecting that, like, I had so much tension inside me, like the nerves I felt before my first combat patrol couldn't even compare to how stressed I felt internally, like in this group, getting ready to admit these faults, right? Like, it felt
more dangerous to admit your faults than to put your life on the line.
Yeah, literally. Yeah. That's how emotionally crippled I was, right? It felt that scary. And I'm not being hyperbolic. I mean, I physically felt like my heart racing, like I thought I was going to throw up. Like I felt like, I guess, a panic attack almost before I admitted this. And I was expecting nothing but judgment, rejection, you know, ridicule, like, oh, you pathetic man. You know what I mean? Like just all that. And there was none of that. It was all the opposite. It was just like empathy and compassion and understanding. And again, not justifying any of my behaviors, but just like, hey man, thanks for sharing. You know, it was like, I get you. I see you, you know, as a human type of thing. And so that was when I was like, oh, okay, maybe the truth is the only way forward. So then after that, you know, my therapist met with me to strategize like how to tell my wife and how to even hope that she'll give me a chance to make amends. And again, like people like on the Zuby podcast, there's comments talking about like, oh, this guy's just taking the blame for everything. It's like, it's not about blame, bro. Like if I would have been just leading myself, I wouldn't have hurt my wife in the way that I did, right? Now, is my wife wrong on a lot? Absolutely. 100%. And she'll tell you that. But the point is like, I'm responsible to be a better man and treat her properly, regardless of her behaviors. And so this gets to a point for today. I tell this to my clients, and I'll say it all the time, is like a good man understands that his convictions have to be stronger than her emotions, or his convictions have to be stronger than what the naysayers are going to throw at him. You have to believe in what you're doing to a level that you're not going to be thrown off by any level of adversity, whether it's ridicule or a quick failure or something like that. And so I was so desperate to people please, essentially, to get approval from others, that I wasn't actually being a good man, even though I was doing good things, right? I was serving my country and all these good things. But the motivation behind it was because I was trying to satisfy this hole within me that I had ignored for a long time. So there's, again, very long-winded way of describing like how did I get help. But I think for me, I'd had like some things pierce through my armor a little bit to kind of start the self-awareness that was required. And through that second time at Onsite, a big piece of that too was my anger towards my dad. And I started to have that realization that, oh, dang, that all sucked for him too. Like I couldn't even imagine being a dad, not being able to see my kids and like all of that stress. And like, I started to see things through his eyes, and just decided for myself, like we walked this labyrinth, and I decided I was going to leave. You literally held a rock to represent it, and you leave it in the middle, and it was going to represent my anger towards him. And I put it down, and I remember like I as I'm walking out, I was like tearing up. It just like this wave came over me. And I felt like, even though I hadn't had a conversation with my dad, that I now understood him and like what he'd been through too. That, this happened to all of us. It wasn't just us, the kids. And that was a really healing moment. And then the other thing I'll say is my therapist basically instructed me, you're going to read this book, and it's called Silently Seduced. And that's where I really learned what emotional incest is, and basically what had been happening in my childhood. And again, not to explain away my behaviors, but to take stock of what was dysfunctional so I can heal it. And that book messed me up, man. That like for 6 months, that was like a real mind trip to have to like come to grips with the fact that, it's like sometimes awareness is not a fun thing to deal with, right? Like you realize the truth of things, it's heavy. And so, yeah, that was kind of this, whoa, really like heavy feeling. And she actually asked my wife to listen to it with me on audiobook so that she would understand why I've struggled so much too. And so she did. And, I have to give a lot of credit to my wife, because she's given me a lot of grace and a lot of forgiveness that I definitely didn't deserve. And I'm sorry, I mean, it's so long-winded here, but this is stuff I just want men to realize is no guy figures this out on his own. There's no such thing as a self-made man. There's no such thing as a good man who's like this lone wolf. It doesn't happen. You're not designed for it. You're actually designed for deep connection with other strong, masculine men to strengthen you, support you, hold you accountable, encourage you. And, that line of like, you're the average of your 5 closest friends, it's true. It's not some cliche. You are going to pick up like osmosis from the people you surround yourself with. And men were really that way as it comes to like male friendships. And so I didn't really have any actual male friends that I was honest with. Like the things I've revealed to you in this podcast are more deep than I talked to my friends back then. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's sad. That's absolutely sad that guys I went to war with, I was afraid of having deep connection because I'll be weak or I'll be gay. You know what I mean? And it's isolating. And so that's where most men are at today. They're completely isolated and cut off. And so, if you're feeling any of the things that I've talked about, like, ooh, man, that's me a little bit, reach out. Like you need to get other guys in your life. That was really what started to move things aggressively for me. Was the next thing I did was went to this place called Mighty Oaks. And Onsite had been really helpful from like a clinical point of view for me to gain awareness. But it wasn't like actionable. Like I was still just like, oh, I don't know what to do. Like I know the problem, but I don't know what to do to fix it. And so that was like stressful. And Onsite was, Mighty Oaks is for veterans and first responders. And, a lot of these guys in my group there, they deployed a lot. They've done really hard stuff. They were like, some of these guys were Rangers and special forces and stuff. And, I'm just like little old me who's in the regular army, right? So I kind of looked up to these guys. And they were just really honest with their crap. And I was like, oh, okay. So maybe it's not weak to just put it all.
If a ranger can do it.
Right, yeah. Exactly, yeah. And my group leader, he poked me in the chest and called me on my crap. Nah, dude, that's an excuse. You're just playing the victim. And I was like, And it really drove that point home for me, that the only way men really learn is to have that. when a guy in my group, he had been blown up by an IED. He's like confined to a wheelchair, and he was basically, he was kind of using his disability as an excuse. Like, well, I can't really be as good of a dad. It was that kind of like line of talking because of this, and this. And the guy our group leader interrupted him and said, "You're using your combat injury as an excuse to be a terrible dad." And the guy got mad and left. And about 30 minutes later, he came back and said, "You know what? You're right." And I was like, eyes like grapefruits, because I was like, whoa, there is nowhere in America that someone is talking to a combat wounded veteran like that. This is 2018, I think. And I was like, whoa, okay. Maybe this is how we actually heal. So
tough love.
It's not all just tough love, but it's in the right context of there was already trust and safety established with these men together, sharing details intimately with each other.
And it was still hard for him to accept that tough love, but because he was in that environment,
it stung.
Yeah.
But things sting because they're true, right? Like that's why jokes are funny, is because there's an air of truth to humor, right? And so in the same way, if you isolate yourself from anything that's going to help you realize that your shit stinks too, you're going to deceive yourself into being this version of yourself that isn't actually real. And so you're going to think you're better than you are. And it's not to like tear you down. It's just to hold you in reality. Because if you do have flaws, you need to have those guys around like, hey, bro, look, this needs to stop. Here's how we're going to work on it together, right? It's not like, oh, idiot, stay down there. It's more like, hey, bro, no, let's figure this out, right? Mm-hmm. Most men don't have that. I certainly didn't have that. And so, I hope this answered your question. I just really want to drive that point home that isolation was kind of it set the conditions for me to keep making these wrong decisions because I had no one to pierce through and be like, bro, stop, and so I just kept doing it because, well, I don't know, I'll just explain it away. We're humans are really good at justifying away our faults.
Really good. I'm reminded of a murder recently, and everyone's really happy to justify
good grief. Yeah.
that murder. I mean, I can't even handle it.
It's insane.
So I was like extremely blessed to have a great dad, and my grandfather was also really great. My Penny 2X is a tribute to my grandfather.
Okay.
So like I come from a line of like great men, and it's been extremely helpful. And it was still, I had to go through some growing pains and figure
We
out
all do.
what it means, right? So like you said, no one learns on their own, even with the assistance of two great men. I still needed to read books and stand on the shoulders of giants before I got to the point where like I really understood what it meant to be me and like hold my territory and be a good man. Did you at any point on your journey like almost quit?
Oh, yeah.
Or like was there something that like might have gone wrong, or a decision that you almost made that could have like really fucked up your progress and your journey? Like, can we get in front of that for anyone?
Yeah, again, repeatedly, I almost made the wrong decision over and over and over. Wanted to give up numerous times. I had tried to quit on the marriage multiple times. I just F this. It's not even worth it anymore. And my wife wouldn't let me, basically, and thank God for her being strong when I was very weak, and again, this is where I was talking about earlier on, I said no situation is like, it's a generalization. So there were times where I was failing her, but she picked it up, right? And she shouldn't have had to, but she did, right? It's not fair to her, but she did it anyway, right? That's the point I'm trying to make here is there's something bigger worth fighting for, right? That's why we strive to be the ideal, is because it's worth it for a lot of reasons. I tried to quit a lot. And again, it's because it was just weakness. It was me playing victim. It was just easier to throw in the towel than actually take accountability for it and responsibility for it. And, a lot of this stuff is kind of the long game. It's going to take a while to heal those wounds, especially when there's infidelity at play, right? Your marriage is now changed forever as a result of that. There are some serious wounds that I created. So, my wife treating me a little bit differently for a time. Well, buddy, you kind of brought that on yourself. You could have maybe had some self-control and you wouldn't have dealt with that. So, all right. That was a hard pill to swallow, right? But, sorry, you asked me like a second half of that question of, did I want to quit? Oh, can we get in front of it? The way you get in front of it as a man is to have other men around you that actually know what's going on, to be like, just to check in on you. Because here's why. If I just knew, like, let's say we knew each other back then, and I told you what had happened, and like you responded with, okay, well, I'm going to check in on you periodically just to see how things are going, and I expect like a detailed report. I'm now at a minimum, a motivator is like, oh crap, well, I'm gonna have to talk to Penny in a week, so I better keep my stuff straight. For a time, that's needed. Like when we're in a state of crisis, we need a little bit of that boundary put around us. Like, ooh, I'm gonna have to talk to this guy. Or there is an element of that that's a positive pressure, right? It's positive peer pressure, and you need that as a man. You absolutely need that. And so then once you get to a point where you're more healthy and more strong and all, your relationships change. There's not just accountability check-ins or whatever, but that is like step one. If I would have actually had some more of that going on earlier, I don't think it would have taken me as long to get to where I needed to get to, right? So this, really started in 2016. It took me all the way until about 2022 to really start making real growth. It had been like slow and then kind of happened fast, right? And it's because I finally started to surround myself with better guys who knew what was going on. And so for a time, it was just that pressure of, ooh, well, I can't let them down. Sometimes that's all it takes. And then it kind of builds from there. Now, I don't necessarily need that as much now, because now it's more like I've grown to now I hold myself to that. Not because I'm some special dude, but it's just like this is part of the process. And so now my relationships like that are evolved to be a little bit more like proactive looking, as opposed to like, just the crisis situation. But it's like, think about if you have a leaky faucet, well, the step one is you got to turn the water off. Then you can go fix the faucet, right? So it's kind of the same way with men, where I think that brotherhood, genuine brotherhood that's actually interested in like knowing what's really going on and really being there honestly, is kind of that essential piece that if you don't have that, it's very, 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 very hard to just have enough willpower to get it done on your own. I think it's virtually impossible. And that was kind of my whole story. I'm a pretty capable guy. I can figure things out quick. I learn quick. I'm pretty smart. So I was able to kind of just willpower my way through a lot of things until it all collapsed, because eventually you're going to get tired and fall apart. And so I think that's really the most essential thing guys need, because most guys have none of that. And that's why their suffering persists for so long, not because they're bad men, but because how are you ever going to get any like upward force on your own? You can't just like start it on your own. That's very rare. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the most important parts of culture is setting boundaries, right?
Yeah.
And I think that, there are like different festivals or, celebrations that go along with culture also. Mm-hmm. But really essentially that's what culture is. It's like, how do we behave in certain situations? What are the boundaries exactly? And I think that it's up to good masculine men to some extent to set those boundaries and to correct our culture. And you're right, if we're all in isolation and we're all acting like angry 16-year-olds, then those boundaries are going to be set incorrectly, and all sorts of things are going to unravel and go wrong. And I really do think that correcting men's behavior, correcting our understanding of what it means to be masculine, stop using or leaning so heavily, at least into terms like toxic masculinity, because I do think it exists, right? But I think it's vastly overused.
It's the tyranny piece, right? It's not using all three legs of leadership and not using all four pillars of man. Right. You're a one-dimensional being, right? Yeah, of course it exists.
So it seems like, if I'm to sum up your thoughts on what's wrong with our country and culture, and please correct me if I'm not hitting the target with this, but it seems like what you think is at the core of what's wrong is like men need to stop being so isolated. We need to form bonds with each other.
Yep.
And we need to focus on those four pillars and enforce them, not just in our own group, but like help spread it into our families and even outside
Absolutely.
Of our families.
Yeah. So as a man grows in himself, right, grows in these things we've been discussing, he naturally becomes more self-confident. It's impossible to do these things and not feel more confident, right? And it's not arrogance, right? There's a massive spectrum between being confident and being arrogant, right? They're completely different things. Confidence is, hey, I have built up the skills, the experience. I've surrounded myself with the people to teach me properly. I can do this. And because now I should, because I owe it to others to do it, right? That's real confidence. So when a man becomes that way, he's now already thinking of others more than himself. He's already less selfish because he's using his powers for good, so to speak, right? And that solves a lot of that internal strife for the man anyway, right? You start behaving in these ways like we've been discussing. You start feeling better with yourself. Your relationship to yourself becomes a lot healthier. It's going to be a lot easier now to have healthy relationships externally, right? But most guys are so discontented inside. They're so, antagonistic to themselves. Of course, they start lashing out or having all these coping mechanisms externally because it's all just this unrest inside themselves. And so it comes back to those 4 pillars. It comes back to just like doing some of these basics. You got to build yourself this foundation. And then as you grow in your masculinity, your ability to lead and to respect yourself, hold your own boundaries for yourself, hold your own standards for yourself, you can now be a standard bearer for your family, for your society, for your business, for your sports team, whatever, right? You can't do those things externally if you haven't built it up internally first. And the reason, like we've been talking about men so much too, is it's not that women can't make impact either.
We're men, first of all. We are
correct.
men.
Right. But I just want to like speak to, detractors will be like, oh, well, women could do this too. And yeah, okay, sure. It's 2 different arguments. And the reason we hone in on the men is if you fix the man, you fix his family by extension. The wife will have a much easier time to grow in her own femininity anyway, or the things she's struggling with. Like, for example, as I've grown and have built emotional regulation, you talked about being calm and assertive. Well, I was very assertive, but I was not calm. I was very explosive. Well, now my wife feels unsure and unsafe, and she's not secure, and she's walking on eggshells. I'm the most dangerous thing in her life. Oof, that's a hard to swallow.
That's not good, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I needed to learn how to be emotionally regulated, how to be stoic. As I've grown in that, it's that much easier for her to conquer her own demons now, because now she's covered by a loving, supportive husband who actually treats her with tenderness and compassion when she needs that, who's understanding, who asks questions of her like, well, hey, honey, it seems like you're not okay. Can you help me understand what's going on? As opposed to being like, why aren't you okay? Fix that, right? Because I've become more of a man, it's easier for her to be more of a woman now. And that's just the way of things. We said men and women are different. It's the truth, right? So this isn't a knock on women. It's just that we need to focus our energy on men first because it actually serves everyone most. It's the highest return on investment. You train a man to be this way, he now is better to his wife, and he's better to his kids, and he's better to his employees or his partners at work or whatever. And that makes bigger ripple effects than focusing elsewhere.
I think some part of it is taking ownership of what we can control anyway, right? Like, we're men, we're going to talk about what we can do.
Well, right,
That's
yeah.
at the core of solving these problems, right?
Exactly.
I'm not going to mansplain to a woman how to be a woman. I think that if the right leaders within that group, right, within the female demographic, stepped up and they changed the way they were acting, it could also maybe have the same effect. But that's first of all, I don't think it's as natural for them to step up and do that, and second of all, that's not really our business, that's their business. So we can talk about our business, right? So there's one more like really, I think, important point that I'd like to touch on, and then we can talk about if there's any other message that you would like to send. But you talked about a fear, right? Like afraid of being labeled as a mansplainer, right? Afraid of being looked at as like overly dominant or like whatever these negative connotations that go along with, the imbalance in culture that we have now. In my experience, at least, as I step into those things, as I, for example, mansplain to people professionally all day, right? That's not to say that there isn't the occasional detractor or someone who talks shit, but actually what I've found is that I'm being like largely embraced for it, right? So I was maybe afraid of doing it, but actually I'm getting a lot of love for it. And I think that that's a really important point to hit on, because it's like a fake fear that we have. These things, if we do them, if we act as if you're talking, you end up being a hero to many, but you were afraid of doing it in the first place. So like, can you talk to me about your experience about that?
Definitely. So I think it's kind of like twofold. I'll just speak generally for like men in general, and then I'll go back to like me, my own experience. I think this will like really tie it in well. So as a man grows in the things we've discussed so far, right? The pillars of manhood and leadership and all these facets, you become a little bit immune to what other people think, because you understand that you're a man on a mission now. You know what your purpose is, and nothing's going to deter you from doing that. And it goes back to that line. Your conviction has to be stronger than whatever the detractor is, right? Your conviction must be stronger than your wife's emotions, right? There are many times where I've told my wife no, not because I hate her and I don't want her to be happy, but because it would not be good for our household. It would not be good for our family to do this thing that she wants. And so, no, I will not support that. Well, she's disappointed and hurt in the moment, and then a week later realizes, you know what, actually he was right. And so it's not about winning, it's just about doing the right thing, what's actually wise and good for our family, right? So that a man can't do that until he's done that work on himself first, right? And then you distance yourself from being a people pleaser, because you now understand that sometimes leadership means disappointing others. Sometimes leadership means being the firm one, not the nice guy.
And usually in the long run, it turns out that they all love you for it anyway. That's the irony of it.
Do you discipline your children when they do the wrong thing?
Damn right I do.
Well, why?
Because I care.
Right, exactly.
It's not because I want to punish them. It's because I want them to learn.
Yeah, it's not because you get pleasure from like, oh, you're in timeout now. No, it's more of like, because I love you, I'm not going to let you keep doing this bad behavior. Right?
And I actually think as a parent, just to side on that a little bit, that's one of the most important things you can do as a parent is like explain everything in detail. Like,
I agree.
I don't like doing this to you. This is not fun for me. I'm doing this because I care, because what you were doing.
Again, with emotional regulation, stoicism, you're not yelling and screaming. Hey, like I get on eye level. Hey, honey, this, and this. We don't, in the Haworth household, we don't do these things.
And here's why.
These are not values we believe in because of this, and this. Mm-hmm. So you did it. The consequence is this. Do you understand? Right? Same thing. Like a husband should do that with his wife. Not the conversation will look different, but you should hold boundaries and standards for your family. And sometimes she's not going to like it, but that's in general, right? Men have to grow first before you're even capable of holding standards externally, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. You may fake it for a while, but you're going to crumble eventually, right? And especially in the context of marriage, that's the hardest place to get it right, because it's the most you have at stake. Mm-hmm. Right? Sometimes it doesn't feel great to do the right thing for my family and have my wife be very frustrated with me for a day or two. It doesn't feel good.
How's it feel in the long run then?
Way better. And she does too. But that's the thing, is you have to have the courage to be able to stomach that short term. And most guys aren't equipped to do that today. We train that in Elite Sentinel. And it's really just a byproduct of other work you do. But we're kind of getting off tangent here. With me personally, I think I was a little surprised by some of the backlash I got and some of the support I got. I really thought women would be pretty antagonistic to what I'm saying. A lot of the times, especially when I talk about like polarity and kind of marriage dynamics, I really thought I'd get a lot of negativity from the women. And ironically, I've gotten pretty much nothing but support from the women. I think
they're coming around.
Well, I think it's actually, I've thought more about it now, obviously in hindsight. It's because, that's what women want. They want a man. Now, it doesn't mean...
They always did.
It doesn't mean like I'm chaining my wife to the dungeon or whatever. It's not like she's like my servant, but at the same time, she wants the man to step up and lead, and she gets to breathe and be a woman underneath my headship, right? And it's refreshing for her. And it makes her life more enjoyable and fulfilling because she can focus on her strengths, right?
And when she behaves like that and is more feminine and less masculine, it balances you better
Absolutely.
Too, right? Like you feel better.
Because men are programmed to want the feminine. So it's I think I was expecting backlash because, feminism is pretty prevalent in our society, but it's actually the women who seem to be most supportive of things I say. And then the backlash from guys I get, I got angry initially. It was kind of like... oh, come on. Because they'd say, pretty nasty things about me. But I realized that that dude's just hurt or he doesn't understand.
I think he's probably in denial of the fact that
or
he
that.
needs your help.
Yeah, and so I've come to have a lot of empathy for people. Like when people say negative things about me, I don't even really take it personally anymore. I just understand that somewhere along the line, someone hurt them. Hurt people. That's what they do. And I have a lot of empathy and compassion for that because I was a hurt person and I caused a lot of pain. And so for me to get up here and act like I'm some, knight in shining armor or whatever would just be so hypocritical. So I do have a lot of empathy for people who are struggling, and I try not to pass condemnation on people like that, and really kind of check myself. And then the other thing too is it's just kind of like not worth it. But to your point about like you were surprised by how little backlash you got, I think that's a natural kind of human survival instinct. We think we're more important than we are, right? Like we think the world is out to get us because it's kind of a survival instinct. It's not natural to go put yourself out there to the world to potentially have millions of people be like, idiot, like your every survival instinct in you is like, don't do that, stop, time out, go away, go crawl back into the corner. It's kind of antithetical to how we are as a human, creature. But the other part of us that is that kind of spiritual, emotional creature longs for human connection. And what you'll start to understand is that if I have something good to offer to others, maybe I'm not the authority on it, but I just have this heart that wants others to win too. Most people are going to see that and they'll either pass it by if they disagree, or you're actually going to be this like breath of fresh air for others to be like, oh, thank God I'm not the only one, And so I think it's this kind of comical experience where that survival instinct puts into overdrive, like, no, everyone's going to see it and everyone's going to hate you and blah, blah, and like, probably not, bro. Like, I've had a few tweets go kind of viral or whatever. And even then it's like, all right, there's like one naysayer to every 100 people who are like, oh, that's so helpful. Okay. All right. I'll help the 99 to have one idiot get mad at me, whatever.
Even if there is pushback, even if there are haters, even if it does go viral and millions of people do see it, because that's happened to me a bunch of times at this point.
Yeah.
Overwhelmingly, like you said, the response is positive, and the people that respond negatively, I feel like they are the upset ones. So like for me, similar to you, over time, I have become more immune to the feeling, processing their pain as part of my own. And instead, like, I just can, I guess, offload it immediately because I know what's happening internally within them.
Yeah.
I think that that's really important for people to understand, right? Because I think that it was an intentional injected fear. I think that like probably our enemies decided to infect our culture with like,
what's his name? Yuri Bezmenov, that the Soviet defector. Like, just go watch. It's like a 6-minute video. Just watch. He literally outlines how, you would destabilize a culture over like a couple generations. And then look what he said and look where we are. And it's like, it's not conspiracy theory. It's like, it's called asymmetric warfare.
It happened.
And we do it to other countries too.
100%. 100%.
So, yeah, there's been an intentional effect, of course. There's negative influences.
So we got to kill society. That fear, right?
Right. And the way you win is to not play along. It's because all of their power is like these whispers and, these.
It's all fake.
There's no actual real power, right? And this is another thing, a lot of people are afraid of like getting fired or canceled. And so it's like, be wise, go pick your battles with wisdom.
Don't start fights.
Right. You're not going to go looking for it. But like, if you're genuinely saying something helpful, good, uplifting, whatever, put yourself out there. Like, if you get fired for that, you'll probably get a pay raise at the next company that wants you.
You're probably at the wrong company in the first place.
Well, yeah. Why would you want to work there for one? I get that. Some people are in situations where they can't just, they may be stuck. I get that. I felt that way too at one point. But the thing is like, maybe you do get fired. But I'm sure that there's another company that's be like, wait, they fired you for that? We want you here then. You know what I mean? And I think that's shifting now too, right? Like you said earlier, I think Elon buying Twitter and turning it into X, and now, Trump's about to, this is January 3rd, we're 2 weeks away from the inauguration. I think there is this shift in the culture that's happening. This is the time for us to double down on these things. Everything that you and I have spoken about so far in this recording, it's time to double down on them, because it's not about winning. It's about bringing us back to an equilibrium of being healthy.
Instead of the pendulum going too far the other way.
Correct. Because if we allow it to build hatred and resentment and contempt and like wanting to punish others or whatever. We're going to go so far to the other extreme. It'll be just as destructive in other ways. And we're going to be right back in this cycle. And so it takes good men to stand up and like have some emotional intelligence, some compassion, and some firmness.
Assert some authority.
We're not
right?
going to tolerate that anymore. We don't hate you, but this behavior is destructive to families, to our culture, to our society. We will not stand for it. You're welcome to join us, and if you don't, here's the consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Boundaries.
That's not hatred. That's called boundaries. Exactly. Mm-hmm. So if you want a healthy, thriving society, it starts with yourself. So men and women, you're responsible for you first. Grow in yourself first, and then master it in your marriage, master it with your kids, and then everything else is second and third order effects from that. And if more people just focused on that, we talked before we started recording how real growth, real success doesn't come from these grand, feats of accomplishment or these huge gestures. It's lots of little things very consistently over time. And, what we can control is ourselves and our families.
I think an interesting bit that I'll add before asking my final question is one of the most important things that I ever learned. It was about a science experiment, but funny enough, I learned it in a Spanish class. I had a Spanish teacher who taught a Spanish lesson about this, but it was about, was it the Skinner box, maybe? Whatever it is, where if you reward behavior every time, then you get a certain amount of changed behavior from it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they'll do it more. But actually, if you only reward intermittently, that it's a stronger association with changed behaviors. And why that's so important for men, specifically as it relates to boundaries, which I think is like at the center of all of this conversation, is that not only do you need to be calm and strong and assertive, but you can literally never break. Because as soon as you reward bad behavior that one time, it encourages it encourages that bad behavior to happen over and over and over. So like one of the biggest parenting mistakes I see, and I think that it probably applies in relationships as well, is like you tell your kid to do something when you don't have every intention on following through if they don't do it, right? It's like you don't tell your kid to come sit down unless if they don't come sit down, you're going to get your ass up and go get them and bring them and sit down. So I think that like that consistency is really important. And I think that like that is lost on a lot of people. You really need to focus on that fact that just that one random reward for the wrong thing like really fucks you over in a way that you wouldn't understand otherwise.
Yeah, that's a really great example. And I'll get very personal with this one. Yeah, my emotional regulation, even at the start of like this time last year, was still had a long way to go. I actually kind of ruined Christmas. So it was 23, Christmas 23, right before New Year. I completely lost it. I blew up on my wife about something small, turned into a huge fight. And then a few weeks later, I was sitting across the table from Nick Lavery, and he talked about how emotional regulation was the number one factor they look for in Green Berets. And in the moment, I felt it.
You're like,
inside.
Oh shit, is that why?
And inside me, I was like, ooh, that's for George. Because if it matters that much to Green Berets, how much more should it matter to a husband, right? And I was like, oh, dang. So, that's been a huge area of growth for me. It's taken a lot of work and a lot of intention. I've had a lot of great people around me to help me with it, of course. But, I was, like you're saying, rewarding the bad behavior. My wife would have certain behaviors and then I would blow up, right? And then boom, here we go. It's like keeping us on that cycle. And it again, maybe she was 100% in the wrong, but then I was wrong to lose it, right? If I could walk away, or I could do something that diffuses the situation and doesn't reward it, and that will actually get us both healthier faster. And so when I finally started doing that, it has worked. Like our marriage has really changed a lot in this last year. We're really getting to just an amazing level that I never thought we'd be able to get to. And again, it started with me taking ownership of myself and not being like, well, she did this, so then who's in charge now? Her emotions are, right? She doesn't want that either. It's not good for her. So again, fault is irrelevant. It's owning the outcomes and just moving forward. And it starts with me. It starts with me as the man. It starts, you listening. It starts with yourself. And when you start to be more consistent, it makes it easier for everyone to heal in their weak areas, right?
So my last question is, what does it feel like to be centered now and to like be finding your truth and be aligned in these ways?
It feels amazing because I wholeheartedly believe I'm doing what I was put on this earth to do. Like I believe completely that this is my calling. I don't think I would have had the success I've had already if that wasn't the case, right? So I'm a man of faith. So for me, I believe, it was about last May, I really felt God saying, "Hey George, I've got a different path for you." Right. And so I really prayed on that. I thought about, I asked my mentors to like really weigh in on like, well, what could I do? And so, I explored it. I didn't just like leap without looking. I put a lot of, time and effort into this. And just for the number of things that had to come together to already be at this point I'm at as of this conversation, I'm not that good, man. Like it has to be something bigger than me. Right. And so maybe you're not religious, but like there's momentum with this that's more than just George. And that feels incredible, right? I believe I have real purpose now. And with what I'm doing, it's making real impact in the lives of others. And so for me, that here's where like you need to know yourself, right? So like one of the litmus tests I did to like really weigh like, well, what am I going to put my effort towards if I start a business is, well, what actually fulfills me? And when I think back to the military, it wasn't that I got to be the guy or I got to do the cool things. Those are great. I love them. Don't get me wrong. I love blowing stuff up and doing all the hua stuff. But the times I'm most proud of, and like I'm really, that like really was top of the mountain experience for me, was the times when it was one of my soldiers that I had poured into and trained, when they got to have like this, huge moment for themselves, or they accomplished a thing they thought they couldn't. And like that charges me. So I understood that about myself. And so then I realized, well, what are my giftings? Where can I apply myself? So that feels really good. And that's where I really challenge men and push them and help guide them to find that thing for themselves. And maybe it's not necessarily what you do for work, but it's finding those areas in your life where you can contribute to something bigger than yourself, because that's where men are producers. We have a natural desire to create something and make some form of impact that matters. And maybe you're not going to go change the whole world.
I am.
You are. Sorry, not you, but those listening. Like we all, like, let's be honest though, we're not all going to be an Elon Musk. I'm certainly not going to be, right? Like that's not my calling in life. Someone else will be. Maybe the next Musk is listening to this right now. But most of us are going to probably just work our jobs and do our things and kind of, like serve at church or volunteer in the community. And that's going to be the max potential for us. And that's not a knock on you. We're all called to different things. We have different giftings, right? So it's not lesser or greater than. But whatever you are, be the best at it, right? Pursue that growth and really lean into it. It feels incredible to finally do what I believe I'm called to do, and to watch the transformation happen in my clients, right? Like you can see it when they join the calls. Like the first couple of weeks, men are very guarded. They're very reserved. You can tell they're a little nervous to like share things and to be honest. And then you just start to see the shift, the way their faces look when they join the meetings. You can see that he is changing in real time before you. And then the real joy of it is to watch them start to work together as a brotherhood, to where it's like, really the gift I'm giving them is the realization that they didn't need me in the first place. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, like that's my goal, is you finish my program and you move out and move on and you're like, I got this now. Great. Congratulations. We did it. That's the goal, is to make them independent. And it's extremely rewarding to see that happen for other people, because I dared to start something. And that's all it is. It's not about me. It's about long-term making this cultural impact. And, as long as I'm able to do this and have the aptitude to do it and, can make the impact, I'm going to keep doing it, because it's really what I believe I'm here to do.
How cool is it that the people you help, you're not just affecting them, but you're affecting their families and their kids and all of the people that they help along the way. I really love, that it has the ability to be viral like that. George, I applaud your honesty, especially, and your mission as well. I think it's super important. Thank you so much for coming and joining me today in my house and recording this. Any final message to share with everybody?
If nothing changes, nothing changes. So, maybe you're listening to this and maybe you're thinking, some of that really hit home for me. Good. that means you're self-aware. That means you're ready to actually do something and change and actually make an impact. But you got to get in the game. And, you know, we we have teachers in school, you have a pastor at church, you have coaches for sports, and then we go into adulthood and get married and just expect that we're going to magically figure it out on our own. So, you know, it's actually not the craziest thing in the world to think that you need a coach to teach you how to be a man. I know it sounds a little silly, you know, with what society is going to say, but of all the areas in your life that you could invest in becoming better, isn't your role as a husband and father the most important one? So, you know, if any of this hit home, please DM me, reach out to me. Let's get you connected. And my sole hope is that you can make an impact in your life and feel better. Feel this presence that like I get to experience now because I was willing to do this hard work. And we'll show you how to do it in 12 weeks. You won't need a decade like me. So that's really the only thing I'd say. And, you know, just dare to do more.
It's important enough to have a coach in something like a sport, right? Where they're just getting you better at something that's not natural. But I feel like we've actually been attacked here, right? We've been trained the wrong things.
Yep.
And it just makes it that much more necessary and important to get sort of like re-leveled out and corrected. And I appreciate what you're doing. So thanks, George.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you having me on, and this has been a real pleasure to meet you.
Absolutely. Have a good rest of your day, man.
Yeah, take care.
All right, cool.